Welcome back, my friends, for another fun reloading video. Today I'm going to show you how I'm shooting 300 Blackout for under 10 cents a round during an ammo and component shortage. At the time of this recording, roughly July 2021, availability is starting to come back. However, prices have not come down, and more often than not, the things that are available are generally steel case or, somewhat inferior to your top choice or your more preferred brand or whatever. Even for components, you might be stuck with an inferior product compared to what you originally had your load workup developed for and all this. And now, because you can only find a new bullet, or in this case, cast our own, now we have to start over and get creative. I was looking online recently just to see what prices were. There was some Wolf 145 grain steel case, $12.98 for 20 rounds, about 65 cents a piece. There was also Barnaul 145 grain steel case, $12.99 for 20, 65 cents a piece. And then the next cheapest was some Insurgent 147 grain full metal jacket brass case, and these were 75 cents a piece. So, if we can be shooting for roughly a sixth to a seventh of that cost, then this could be some good cost savings and actually lead to more shooting because we're able to spend less per shot to get more shots out total. So as we can see here, our bullets, these were free. Yes, I did have to mine a berm to collect the lead. I had to melt that down into ingots and somewhat purify it. I had to then melt that down in my other pot and actually cast the bullet. I then had to powder coat them and then finally size them. So yes, there is tooling involved, there is time, there is effort, there is a learning curve. But yeah, these bullets are free. And the next piece that's also free is our brass casing. You can see this is a WCC, which is their NATO head stamp white box stuff, usually the 62 grain or the XM193 or whatever. This is one of the more easily converted head stamps, or one of the more popular ones rather. So they're easy to convert, they're free, you find them on the ground, you chop them down, you form it, and we make sure it fits in our gauge, and we're good to go. Our brass and our bullet was free. So, how do we come up to 10 cents? Well, our primers here, I actually got for maybe $35 per thousand a few years back. So anyways, I'm going to call it 5 cents per shot for a primer, because these days I've seen them for anywhere as low as $55 up to $75 or even $90 per thousand. And some people are paying that, which would be, 8 or 9 cents per primer. So I'm going to go ahead and go with $50 per thousand, bringing our cost up to 5 cents per shot. And then lastly, to fill up the case, you need some powder. Here I have a very economical option. It's a low charge weight, yet very reliable function, very good ejection, decent velocities, but I'm not pushing for velocity here, so to speak. I'm more going for accuracy, and this is just a plinking round anyways, so if I don't have the best velocity or the best SD or any of these factors people are looking for out of a powder, that's sort of less important for this load compared to economics. So how much did our powder cost, you're wondering? Let's pretend I looked online and saw it for $158.99, and that was at Graf's. I also saw it at Midway for $165, and at Mid-South Shooter Supply for $158.99 as well for an 8-pound jug. Let's pretend I got it from Mid-South Shooter Supply and paid taxes. That would put me around $175 for an 8-pound jug. That is $21.88 per pound. This is also 0.03 of a dollar per grain, which puts our cost with our 12 grain charge at 3.75 cents. And then finally, if we take the cost of our primer, 5 cents, and add it to our 3.75 cents, we end up at 8.75 cents per shot with this recipe here. And so there you go, that's my thought process behind how I'm currently shooting 300 Blackout for under 10 cents. And I say under 10 cents because you could have a different powder that might might be cheaper. You could have a different primer that might cost more. So if you change a couple variables, of course you're going to end up with a different cost. So 10 cents seems like a pretty good benchmark to shoot for in the current environment. So I hope this helps you guys out. But if you want to stick around, we're going to load some up here and take them out to the range and see how they perform. So hang out and we'll get to loading some up here in just a second. So like I said, you have to start with your brass. This was all basically free once I formed it from picked up 223 brass I got at the range. There's dozens of head stamps that work. There's a list you can find online on some different forums that are pretty comprehensive, and they have the correct brands and head stamps that you can convert successfully. So I've done that. I have 50 pieces here. They're all mixed, but they all also fit in our headspace gauge, which is very important when you're doing your initial forming, and also sizing them after that as well. And because our brass is already going to be formed and sized and trimmed and prepped correctly, the first stage on our progressive press today is going to have our universal case expanding die. That's because we're using cast bullets. You have to open up that case mouth just a little bit so we don't shave off any of that powder coating or lead at all. So here we are at our Dillon 550. You'll see stage 1. We have our universal case expanding die installed here and set up correctly already. So we will also measure our case mouth here just to show what kind of stuff we're dealing with. Right now we are at 326, and we'll also see how this tries to fit. You'll see that it would shave off some of that powder coating, and we don't want that with our bullets inside of our chamber. So we're going to go ahead and run this up. It'll bell out that case mouth, and then I'm going to prime it on the way down. And now we can see this bell on the mouth here allows our bullet to sit right in there, and we can measure it. We went from 326 up to about 336, which isn't a whole lot as far as I can tell. I just barely bell them out enough to get that bullet to start seating, and then once we're crimping it, we just want to squeeze that enough to close it back up and start to grip on the bullet. So next we have to rotate our bullet from stage 1 clockwise over to stage 2, where we are going to add powder into the case. And right now we're pouring in 12 grains of our Shooter's World heavy pistol. And we're going to check that real quick also. Here's my case that I just primed. We're going to set it on our scale, let it power on and 0 with that. And now once we add some powder, we also have to add a new piece of brass and a bullet in the appropriate stages. But we're going to weigh out the powder here on stage 2 and see if we're getting our 12 grains. Remove the locator pin. We'll move over here. Set it down without spilling it. And it's making a liar out of me, but 11.9, 12 grains. That's our charge. Replace our locator pin. And now we'll rotate again and start seating our bullet. So here's the case we just charged. We have to rotate again, add more brass, add a bullet to the one we are now seating. We'll run this through, and we're going to measure it to make sure that we are at exactly 1.995 or 2 inches on the dot. There we are at 1.996, which is just perfect. It'll feed excellently from my gun. We still have extra wiggle room in there, so there's a little bit of case capacity. And now we'll get over here to crimp and test it out in our case gauge and make sure we're good to go. Again, rotate, add bullet, add brass over here. Now we'll rotate and I'll pull this one out. We'll check our gauge. Right in and right out. And this one just happens to be a WCC 14 head stamp. Again, they're all random, but they fit the specs and they were sized properly. So we have the proper headspace. Perfect. Just for reference, I'll show you this one that won't get crimped. Or rather, I'll try to put it in the gauge after we seat it, but before we crimp it, and you'll see that it will not fall into the gauge. See how high up we are here? Once we crimp it, it will properly chamber for us. So I've got about 40 more to do. Let's go ahead and knock these out, and I will see you out at the range. So here we are on our last few rounds. Everything is running great so far. Had a couple of tight primer pockets that didn't get totally reamed out, but they're just going in smooth for the most part. Nothing wrong with that. Better to take off less material than wishing you had some to put back. So you can kind of hear how some of those take a little bit of force, but it's not smashing the primers or anything bad like that, so nothing to worry about there. That's our last piece of brass. So you heard how that was sort of harder to prime, but that's just because it's pretty tight, and you can see our primer went in just perfectly. There we go. New bullet here. And we'll make our last one a red one. How about that? Perfect. Don't lose it. And our last one, we'll spot check it with the case gauge. Oh, it's perfect. Plunking. Just did some quick math. This whole box of 50 rounds cost me $4.38. That's freaking crazy. 50 rounds, $4.38. Wow. So we're going to put our little cheat sheet in there, and we're going to head out to the range, guys. We'll see you in a minute. And welcome back from the range, folks. Here we are. We got a little footage to roll in here, but first we'll check out our target. We were sighting in at 50 yards today with our red dot. Here were my first 2 shots, so I went down a few clicks. We ended up right here, so I called that good. I loaded up 10 more shots, and this was 10 shots with the spread and my 3 MOA dot and all of the excuses. So from here, after these 10 shots, I moved it up a couple clicks and left, I think, a click or 2, and I just called that good. And so here we are with our next 10 shots, going 10 for 10 on the steel at 100 yards. I was pretty stoked, man. I was just holding center mass. I wasn't quite sure what would happen, but we just held it there. It functioned flawlessly, and we were tinging them all day long. And then after that, I think I had, 25 rounds left. I just kept shooting at some steel, and there was another one on the far side of the range. It was, I think, a 6-inch little gong or something. I hit that a few times too. That was fun, except it kind of fell over, so then I couldn't hit it anymore. But anyways, I would call this accuracy totally acceptable for a sub 10 cent round. And as far as plinking and training and using your firearm and getting in trigger time, you can't beat something like this. And anyways, here's a look at our brass. They were all mixed head stamps, and I'm using a Palmetto State upper, but this time I'm using my Bear Creek Arsenal bolt carrier group. So we're going to see some flowing on the primers that aren't quite an indication of pressure on this one, but they are something to notice. So here's just 4 we picked out at random. You can see a little bit of cratering. However, you can also see the edge of the primers are totally rounded and they haven't flown over into that space at all. So this is one of those times where cratering on your primers is not necessarily something to worry about. However, it is good to note if you see it. And here's 4 more at random. Again, you can see the same cratering, but the primers are still totally rounded out. So we're nowhere near pressure, which is going to be good for our brass life. You can see they're a little dirty, but it got a full seal, I'm pretty certain, around the neck there. You can see the little ding from the ejector, or sorry, from the deflector, but that sizes right out with no issue. We don't have any extra cracks. All of our case heads, there's no ejector swipes or anything like that to worry about. So as far as brass, you couldn't ask for anything better. It functioned flawlessly while still using a quite low charge. We're getting great accuracy. We're putting the bullets where we're aiming the gun, and that's all we need to ask for here in this situation. So I would call this pretty much a success. However, you always need to work up your own load in your own gun. Don't just start with my charge. You need to do your own research. So in conclusion, there you have it, folks. This is my 300 Blackout round for under 10 cents. Yes, of course, you can do it for cheaper. I actually have some primers that might have been around $20 per thousand from way back when. I might have bought some at $60 per thousand. It's going to vary from person to person, but if you can keep your prices as low as possible, you can stretch out your dollars and get more components. And if you're also foraging and being resourceful with your brass and your lead, you can stretch that even further. Also, people are aware that you can reload your own primers. That would bring that cost down to roughly 1 cent per shot as well on the primer department. And for powder, you're going to be hard pressed to find a more economical charge and combination than this one here. But if you do, please let me know, because I'm all about volume and being able to practice without spending a ton of money, and getting more range time is always better. So share with us down below some of your own recipes and some of your really cheap loads you like to do. So anyways, guys, if you enjoy this sort of content, feel free to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Stay tuned for more. We will see you in the next one. Have a good one.